this podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. So on a day like this, I think I spoke to maybe a dozen or so friends of the podcast, people that for the most part feel frustrated with the verdict today, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon's verdict. And I think frustration is the overarching emotion. I think maybe there's a sense of disappointment. And at the same time, it's obvious that something fundamental happened today, something that may be a critical moment in Lebanese history, that we can actually name an individual from an organization responsible for an assassination. The bare minimum happened. But that said, there is a frustration. And I feel it for many reasons, and we're going to sort of explore a lot of these things. But the reason I messaged you today is because I sensed that you felt the same way. And it's just a matter of reading a certain number of tweets in a row and in a way bothering you to see if you're free in the evening. You're very generous. I know the legalities are not our expertise, and I don't want to really go there anyway. I just want to explore what's at stake and maybe the wider story of justice and accountability and what protesters have been demanding since October 17. And we spoke last time, I believe it was either October or November. It was in the first weeks of the protest movement. And we touched on many things, local demands. We also touched on regional affairs and how they work together, not usually for the better of the average Lebanese citizen. But I'd like to re-explore all these things, and maybe we can start with just the emotions. Do you feel frustrated in the sense that you were hoping for a bigger moment? Meaning that after 15 and a half years following Hariri's assassination, were you expecting it's almost like you would want to see somebody head to jail rather than a trial in absentia. You'd want to see the criminal facing charges and being sent away. Something very basic. Does it come from there? Or does it actually come from that after all this time, we're settling on one name, a mid-level figure who clearly did not do this on his own, but that's what we're given. We're given that, and we're given 2,600 pages of information to look at later. I just want to get your immediate reaction. What is frustrating to you the last few hours since the verdict was issued?
Look, I always had a realistic sense of what to expect from the STL. So much time has lapsed since the assassination. The process was complex. The setup of the court, it's a hybrid court. The threshold for evidence, it took so much time. It was draining. At one point, you remember, it was the focal point of Lebanese politics for things. So we all went through the ups and downs, but I never thought that the verdict would be a transformational moment for Lebanon. Now, and so I wasn't in a way really angry or disappointed today. I wasn't really angry. I was disappointed. Sorry, in this sense. But then I took some time to reflect, And why was I disappointed? I think I was disappointed because this morning when I woke up, I'm like, let's hope it's going to be something big. I mean, you basically, I mean, I'm an analyst. I hope I'm sober most of the time, but you allow yourself at times.
I hope you're not having a drink in the morning. I mean, that would be detrimental to the analysis. Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, for a second, I thought, for a few hours, I thought perhaps it will be different. It will be bigger. And so, I mean, I set myself up for disappointment in this sense. But I thought about the verdict in the afternoon. And in fact, the verdict, while unsatisfactory at several levels, however, settles one thing. This one individual, Ayyash, was, yes, a mid-level commander in Hezbollah, but he has been found guilty on numerous charges. And it's clear in the verdict that he conducted this operation as part of an organization. It wasn't a lone act. Now, all the rest, for you and for me and others, is, we know the context of Lebanon. We know that Hezbollah as an organization, doesn't allow lone operators to do their thing. We know how big the operation is. The judges today spent hours recounting the facts, the data, how big the charge is, and the cover-up that evening, and the total disregard that the Lebanese government in 2005 had for the victims, and how it dealt with the crime scene, etc. Mm-hmm. So we're able to connect the dots at that level. And so it is a political charge in a way. We look at a specific organization that conducted a specific act, and we were given by the SPL a crucial element: the fact that there's a specific individual who's named, I won't say his life history, but the relevant history was given to us on that. And so I'm not saying we'll find closure. And again, I stress the point: the verdict was never going to be a transformational moment for Lebanon. It wasn't going to make us feel good, and it wasn't going to change the balance of power. It wasn't going to, give us the justice that which denied all along. But it gave us something that we never had before, which is a name, a link to a specific set of actions on an issue of that shook Lebanon. It's a turning point. It was a turning point in our history. So I don't the way the verdict essentially allows everyone to interpret it the way they want. I mean, and this is in a way the irony and the perverse element in all this is that if you're Hezbollah, you spent over 10 years, 15 years, denigrating an international investigation and the tribunal. You called it the product of the Zionists and the Crusaders and the Wahhabis and whatever. You did not cooperate with the investigation and so on. And today you're faced with the fact that actually that tribunal, when it felt it didn't have enough evidence to find some individuals guilty, said so. But when I felt that they had evidence to find an individual guilty, the tribunal did so. And so in a way, the tribunal asserted its credibility as well today. And that's also something else to consider. Look, ultimately, this process was unsatisfactory. It took way too long. It's very clear that the bulk of the investigation was ready 10 years ago. We didn't need to drag it another 10 years. In those 10 years, the region has changed massively between the war in Syria and all the regional competition and the deal with Iran and then the collapse of the deal and the development of militias in Iraq and in Syria. I mean, and the assassination of Soleimani. I mean, this is not the region that we knew in 2005 or even 2010. So the issue has really lost its place on the regional agenda. It is not at the center of politics anymore. Mm-hmm. But for for us as Lebanese, I go back to that point. We never had an honest process where we put all the facts on the table and try to see, what makes sense, what can be proven, and figure out, is there a specific person who can be blamed for it? So yeah, I mean, like you, I'll go to bed tonight and I'm like, okay, I wish it were bigger. I wish, more names had been named and so on. But remember, the tribunal, the scope of its investigation was limited. It could not name entities or countries.
Right.
So all these headlines that say that the tribunal found Syria and Hezbollah not guilty or evident, that's not what the tribunal was about. It was about those 4 individuals, 5 while Badruddin was still alive, and it did find one individual without a shadow of a doubt to be central to the organization and the conduct of this assassination.
I mean, I'm going to ask you this, and this is a very broad question. Do you think the verdict has any impact on the day-to-day affairs right now, at least when it comes to protesters pushing for reform, or just the wider story of accountability? And I know that these are not crimes that are linked necessarily, but 2 weeks ago, the nation was shaken to its core with these blasts at the port, and people get killed, and there's sort of rage on the streets, and you see people demanding some form of justice. Does the tribunal in any way to you link to that wider struggle that we're seeing on the ground right now? And just that there is a genuine aspiration for accountability, and the verdict is, in a way, it's supposed to help in that wider story, giving us a name, like you just said, and offering us maybe an answer, when in other assassinations they've kind of just been sort of swept under the rug and we never know really what happened. So do these stories link, or are they fundamentally separate? And because 15 years has gone by, that there's just the STL's verdict is a blip, and there's a much different story on the ground right now?
Okay, unsatisfactory answer: yes and no. I mean, I think
that's the verdict.
Yes, because I mean, exactly. I find inspiration in The Hague for all
maybe we should list them: the Mueller report, the STL verdict.
Yeah, exactly.
These are all yes and no's.
Exactly. No, I mean, look, I think the yearning for truth, for justice, remains.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, the conclusion of the STL today shows that international investigations are not the panacea. And I'm certainly not arguing that we shouldn't have done the STL. I think it was good to do all this. I'm just describing the mood. Like, a lot of people will say it took 15 years and $1 billion to get to that. Big disappointment from that perspective. The other thing is that the clamor in the streets was for an international investigation of the explosion at the port, right? And so what was the answer of President Aoun and others? It's like, it's going to be a waste of time, and this is exactly. So this dismissive attitude, certainly not something I subscribe to. I want to be clear about this. But guess what? In a way, now they can point at the STL and say, oh, you want again this, and you will be disappointed, and you want. I mean, it's a very populist talking point. It's not an argument that will win over people like us. But you cannot dismiss it. Look, ultimately, a lot of people who supported the STL didn't do so because they were Hariri supporters. I mean, I don't count myself as a Hariri supporter. I disagreed with a lot of his economic policies. I disagreed with how he ran the affairs. I'm not going to sing the praises of Hariri. I mean, in some ways he was a remarkable man, and others a pretty flawed one. Mm-hmm. But the point was that when we asked for an investigation and we asked for an international tribunal. And so we did it on matters of principle. You know, Lebanon at the time was under Syrian occupation. There was a very strong suspicion that a foreign country had a hand in killing a foremost official of our country. There was absolutely no reason to believe that the Lebanese government at the time would have conducted a fair and a transparent investigation. But it was also the point. We needed justice, if only to say that in Lebanon, it's not just about revenge. It's not about, the grievances that fester forever and those assassinations that happen, and then suddenly we forget about the victims and we forget. I mean, it was, again, a matter of principle. It wasn't just political expediency. It wasn't just, opportunism. Oh, let's corner Hezbollah or the Syrians or whatever for this. Yeah. It was fundamentally about wanting things to be different. The issues of justice, of peace, of security. We wanted something fundamentally different. I'm not saying we were successful, and we can, I think we should relate this discussion to exactly what you say, what's happening on the streets, which is in 2005, you had this March 14 movement, but the March 14 leadership that so many people supported was not a reformist leadership, and actually it contributed to bringing the country to where it is today. Yes. And so, sometimes you think you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, and you then actually realize that the corrupt politics of Lebanon take over. That you start with the best of intentions, and you end up in places you don't want to end up.
With that said, my assumptions, looking back now to 2005 and 2006, prior to the tribunal, just the investigation, that the disappointment that you just described and that wider feeling of that there's some positive in the story, but it's sort of mired with a lot of... we wanted Lebanon to improve, not reach where we are today. I felt the same way back then. And it goes back to the decisions made early on, that not to push too hard with this investigation and to maybe, in a sense, water it down. And then years go by where not much happens. And I think it's been a 15-year journey of repeated disappointments, and that includes other assassinations. And on a personal level, and we talked about this a bit before recording, I think I would have liked to see political assassinations end with Hariri's assassination. That sort of should be the last one, and that we no longer have to deal with this, that politics can be discussed. Whether it's with Hezbollah or any other group, it doesn't matter. And that, to me, is something that is, maybe it's missing from the story. It's that we still live with political assassinations. We also live with a group that does not tolerate a certain level of criticism, and that violence is part of the story, even in 2020. So I think my frustration, and speaking on my own behalf here, is that I lost my father 8 years after Rafik Hariri's assassination, 4 years after the tribunal goes into effect. And like you said earlier, this is 15 years later, that it just took too much time. I'm trying to, maybe I'm not doing it in the best way possible, but I'm trying to maybe determine whether or not this is really just now a chapter that we've closed, and we're now entering something that's, in a way, the STL does not provide any tools that we can use right now in fixing things. That justice, it's still an aspiration. It's not something that we can learn from this, take from this, and say, now we have something to actually prevent further assassinations from happening. I can see it happening again. And I can see violence continue. And I can see, political crimes recurring. And I don't want to sound too bleak here, but back then, 15 years ago, I really thought that we were turning the page for the better, not for the worse. Does any of that resonate with you? Just in terms of the long, unhealthy journey we've gone through since 2005.
certainly, I mean, everything you said is, I feel it.
Mm.
The STL was not clearly a deterrent to
Right.
more political crime.
Yeah.
It took so long that it was overtaken by the geopolitics, the changing geopolitics of the region,
Exactly.
the changing politics of Lebanon. Consider all the ups and downs inside Lebanon. Remember in 2009 scene when Saudi Arabia and
Yes.
Syria had the rapprochement, and then suddenly, Prime Minister Hariri has to go to Damascus.
Yeah.
Do you see? I mean, do we want to go back to all the political deals that have been made in the process that didn't make much sense to us? But in a way, the fact that the investigation and the trial took so long set us up for failure. I mean, in a way,
Right.
everything was exposed to all the vagaries of regional and international politics.
Right.
And today, I mean, look, the situation in Lebanon today is so dire that one cannot be mad if people just brush the whole thing away. I mean, for most people in Lebanon today, it's all about survival. People are the proportion of people under the poverty line is stunning.
Yes.
We're starting to hear about potential famine. We hear all the time, and we know the statistics are quite scary about the number of people who have lost jobs, people who can't send their kids to school, universities that are in dire straits, hospitals. I mean, people are in survival mode right now.
Yeah.
And so 15 years ago, we sold them, the idea that an international investigation will help Lebanon get on track, that it
Right.
will actually be a positive shock to the country.
Yes.
And the reality 15 years later is that it's not the case. And you also mentioned the issue of, further political assassinations. And so I agree. I mean, I think we're entering a very dangerous period of our history where, because of the collapse of the financial and political collapse of the country, it's very possible that people will seek a sense of protection, security, will seek benefits and foods, from the typical sectarian warlords and so on. And that will open a new chapter of violence in the country. And this time, there won't be an international community that's so interested in coming to our rescue. They won't be generous benefactors left and right, including on the tribunal. A number of countries have pitched in to keep the SAL on. It wasn't just Lebanon, for that matter. But, Lebanon is much lower on the priority list. I think the Beirut blast, in a way, created a wave of sympathy. Everyone from Russell Crowe to Rihanna to, I mean, no, but and I'm genuinely thankful for it, but yet again, you have sympathy, you have all this, and then a couple of weeks later, you realize that perhaps it won't amount to much. Perhaps Jabran Basil and Saad Hariri and Nasrallah and whatever are still up to their typical games. That we're still talking about the formation of a government the way we used to before, as if we didn't lose our port and a quarter of our capital. I mean, it's just surreal. And then in the meantime, what you have is so the military gets emergency powers in Beirut. The security agencies have failed us essentially because they couldn't they couldn't get to this bomb before it detonated, but now they have the power to repress protesters. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's all so crazy in a way. But, again, the problem in the country is that there is a lack of leadership among reformist forces. People really disagree on the issue of the international investigation. Again, even on the issue of the ports. There are people who don't want to go down this road, even among protesters for that matter, because it's always a issue of sovereignty and so on. So my point is like sovereignty. I mean, half of the population is applying for visas to get out of the country, and we're talking about sovereignty. I mean, so the tribunal wasn't a positive shock, and in a way, I fear that the port explosion, which was horrendous. I mean, I keep thinking about it, and those of us who are abroad also feel a lot of guilt for not being there and not helping and saying. But for a moment, one thinks that it's going to shame those politicians so much that they will do the honorable thing, except that one day or 2 days later, that there is not an ounce of honor in these guys,
Absolutely.
and they're back to their horse trading.
Yeah. I like that you said it several times, and it's true that time, the duration matters. Tribunal, you're absolutely right. This could have been wrapped up years ago, and maybe it would have been more useful back then. And today, this is 2 weeks after the port blasts. And when it comes to uprisings and revolution and change, by now, one of the usual suspects would be in jail, or they'd be so afraid to go on TV they wouldn't give silly interviews, that there would be so much fear that you would actually see the beginnings of something new, and that didn't happen. And I completely share that sentiment. We're going back to politics as usual, and that's the worst outcome for this kind of tragedy. I'll also echo something you said earlier about the potential for assassinations to happen. I think that is part of the reason why the protest movement did not naturally have a leadership at the beginning. But it is to its detriment long term to not have a structure that you can work with or have dialogue with, or for that matter, work with internationally. So that the threat of assassination keeps this protest movement to some degree from organizing in a way that it could achieve political authority. And then you have the regional story, which you mentioned earlier. And I want to ask you, you're somebody who analyzes the region for a living, so you're the perfect person to ask this question. We've had other tribunals in history, ICTY, ex-Yugoslavia, but complementary to that tribunal is the Dayton Accords that ends that conflict, and then Kosovo ends with NATO's involvement, so there's a lot of intervention, and the ICTY does its job. And then we see very shocking things. The Serbian president in jail, Milosevic, dies of natural causes in jail. And his name escapes me now, but the Bosnian Serb paramilitary leader who just...
Ratko Mladic.
Was that his name? The one who committed suicide on TV?
Ratko Mladic, yeah.
Are you sure about this? I don't think it's him. I know he's one of them.
That was the main one. Sorry.
Yes,
yeah,
Mladic,
yeah.
Karadzic are the two big ones.
Yeah, the top two, sorry.
Yes, but they're one of them... I don't...
Yeah, I remember now.
Yeah, his name...
wasn't him. You're right.
Right. He's on TV, takes that poison and commits suicide on live television, but commits suicide facing trial. Doesn't commit suicide at home. And you know what? That is justice finding its course. But it's not justice born simply out of a tribunal's desires. Does the regional story at the end of the day matter the most to Lebanon? That there is a group right now, its leader, sort of, as you said earlier, derailed the STL's verdicts. That's of no concern. The accused, Salim Ayesh, is probably sleeping in his home tonight. And these things will not change unless there's a regional dynamic at play that favors the sovereignty of Lebanon. It almost sounds so romantic to say it that it sounds silly, that there's a regional understanding to shield Lebanon from regional problems. Wishful thinking, maybe. But is that what's at stake at the end of the day? Where you would see maybe the turning the page for the better, where political violence is no longer a favored weapon by certain groups, and that you could actually see reform and accountability, and the incompetency, the recklessness that's plaguing Lebanon right now, that it would eventually stop, and we can rebuild. So, regional external actors that still participate in Lebanon's affairs. Is that what's at stake, or is it still a grassroots sort of protest movement that will have to get there on their own? Because in my mind, there's always an interplay between the two. But today, it exposed something to me, which is if the region doesn't want it, it won't happen. And the STL, and I say this carefully, can go to hell. We don't care.
Look, the region will not want justice and accountability in Lebanon more than the Lebanese will want it. Yeah. And if anything, I suspect that any regional settlement, however improbable it is at the moment, will favor stability over justice again. Right. So, if tomorrow let's dream together, the Iranians and the Saudis and the Americans and others, figure out, the perfect formula and so on. They're not going to sit at the table and say, okay, Lebanon, let's open the file. Oh, assassinations. Yeah, we have to do something positive about it. To fix this. It's not going to happen. I mean, and to be honest, at this point, the region has changed massively. The Saudi, which put it part of the bill for the tribunal, like others, is much less interested in Lebanon than it was before.
Right.
And in fact, even in 2009, I go back to this when King Abdullah reconciled with Bashar al-Assad, and you had the so-called clean scene, and I mean, it shows you that the political preferences of these regional powerhouses can change and can affect small countries like ours. I think first and foremost, it's a question of civic responsibility inside Lebanon. Mm. We need to want nonviolence. We need to want accountability. We need to want justice. If we don't, then we shouldn't expect the neighborhood to be kind to us and to give us any of this. By the way, there won't be accountability and justice and transparency and so on in these other countries either. I mean, they just to be clear, the regional powerhouses are not embracing the values that we hope will
Absolutely.
take Lebanon to the next stage. So I'm very cynical from that perspective, and I think this is where, in Lebanon we're very good at missing opportunities. We had this small moment where actually there was enough attention, enough international investment, and so on in the case, but we wasted it. We wasted it because we were calling for justice in The Hague, but our various governments in Lebanon did not deliver justice to the citizens, whether it's social justice, whether it's reform of the judiciary, of the security services. I mean, and to some extent it's true, and I stress this to some extent because I don't want to be misunderstood on that one. It's true that the importance given to the Hariri assassination in particular was for political reasons. But it was a political assassination. It was a leader. It was this. But it doesn't mean that, it was politicized or whatever. I mean, it was
right.
Something quite
right.
It was the foremost leader of the country at that point.
Yes.
Killed in very specific circumstances. But it does not justify, the lack of reforms and the incompetence and the injustice that the Lebanese suffered after, including by people who were in the camp pushing for international justice on the Hariri assassination and other assassinations. This is quite fundamental. We had many years during which we could have pushed a reform agenda in this country and prevented things to get to where they've come. But we spent these years celebrating Lebanese resilience, a word that I despise. Resilience for me was avoidance, it was complacency, it was kicking the can down. It wasn't resilience. Lebanon is not immune to the laws of physics or economics or security or anything else. All this was meant to come back and hit us hard. And that's what we lost in the process. It's like we thought that we acted as a spoiled child. We wanted our justice to be given to us by the SCL. We wanted money to avoid enacting reforms. So we were begging. We told everyone, it's like, oh, poor Lebanon. Yeah, we have a garbage crisis. Yeah, that's because of the Syrian refugees. No, it's not because of the Syrian refugees. But it's easy, like to link our structural problems to others. But in the meantime, we would go to donor conferences and go and beg for more money and so on. And this is what, in a way, angers me. It's like we as we discussed, we failed to actually get a satisfactory verdict at the SCL, although what happened isn't as bad as, from a purely the prism of the case. I don't think it's that bad, but politically it is. But then, everything else we got wrong, to the point where 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate blew up, destroying 1/4 of our capital. I mean, you and I are laughing, but we're in tears inside.
Laughing in shock. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
This is our city. These are our people, and and that's how bad government got.
I'll only pick your brain on this, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but since you're bringing up something that resonates with me immediately, and as somebody who was there during the protests I was there until January, so everything that went wrong everything that could go wrong went wrong, and that includes the Beirut blasts in the port. It's almost like all the problems lined up for that occasion and destroyed the city. Is there anything to do with the lack of interest, let's say, in making the investigation in 2005, in a way, more important? Because I'm using this term very loosely, accountability. Everything you just said, the worst Lebanese politicians in recent history emerged in those years, after his assassination, after Hariri's assassination. And by 2016, you said it earlier, it's like the worst kind of deals were made just for political survivability. And you had people making, it really was just pure petty politics, and at the detriment of Lebanon. And then by 2019, the population has said enough. But is there anything about, you have a massive attack in 2005, and you're right, it's a political assassination, but that because the repercussions were fairly small to at least the group participating in that kind of attack, that they were more emboldened, let's say, to steer the politics of Lebanon in a direction that was to the detriment of everyone. That includes their allies, and that includes the nominal opponents that stayed alive, largely on their terms too. That you ended up in a situation where the accused simply got more and more powerful, and the state got weaker and weaker and weaker, and that the worst disaster in recent history happened on their watch. Is there anything to that?
Look,
because I still feel like 2005, 2006, and I agree fully with what you said, had there been more of a push back then, it's hypothetical, we may have been able to address other things that culminated in the last 15-year downward spiral.
Look, the way I see it is the following. Every political leader in Lebanon has an interest in a weak state. These guys are essentially predators. They want a functioning state, one that generates profits, rents, public sector jobs, those kind of things. But essentially, they want a weak state. Now, for us, the challenge is that Hezbollah is different from them in the following sense. All the others are predators. They exist, but they exist within the system. Hezbollah wants to be inside the system and above the system at the same time. I don't think that the danger, contrary to a lot of my Lebanese interlocutors and friends, I don't think Hezbollah wants to dominate the system,
absolutely,
but wants to control Lebanon.
Right.
Hezbollah cares about three things. First, its armed status. Second, its strategic and operational autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And third, a veto right over security and foreign policy. Okay. But it will do everything to protect these three things. Mm-hmm. Everything, and we've seen it. Now, the problem for us reformists all along was the following, and that was a dilemma I lived and others, I remember him, is to say, okay, we want to build a strong state, a state that is capable, competent, responsive. Mm-hmm. We want a state where all Lebanese are citizens, where every vote matters, where we dismantle sectarianism and so on. Yes, of course, it's going to be a very difficult process. But then the question for us is, where do we start? And for a number of us, and especially because of the Hariri assassination, the starting point was we need a process to disarm Hezbollah. I'm not saying that, and to guarantee Lebanese sovereignty. And for us, the alliance or the acceptance of the March 14 political leadership mm-hmm. was a means to an end. It's that, okay, with these guys, perhaps we can push a process to disarm Hezbollah. And I'm not talking about a violent process, politics that have been used and so on, and to guarantee Lebanese sovereignty. And then once this is addressed, then you move on to political reforms. Okay, so in a way, it was a question of it was the sequence thing that we had in mind. Mm-hmm. Others would argue that no,
the other way.
We had it right. You start with political reforms and then you deal with Hezbollah. But then the question for us was that if that's the case, and there are proposals like that where we start political reforms and we freeze the issue of Hezbollah, and then once the state is strong enough, then we address the question of Hezbollah. And my point is that so you're asking us to take heads on all those politicians, except the most powerful ones who may end up benefiting from all our efforts to undermine, mm-hmm. all those dramas. Mm-hmm. That was a discussion. I mean, and there are others who say, and that's where I found myself at the end, is to say, no, these two things have to happen at the same time. It's not sequencing political reform first, and then disarmament of Hezbollah, or disarmament of Hezbollah, then political reforms. Mm-hmm. Both need to go hand in hand. And essentially, we failed, and we could have used the momentum of 2005 to do so. And I say we a lot. To be honest, I wasn't in Lebanon. I personally was never a political activist. I mean, at a much more intellectual level that I operate.
That's the imperial we. I'll let you determine how far your boundaries go.
No, but I used to I love these discussions, and I used to be quite engaged intellectually on this. But so I had no role, but I see it was quite important. It was a quite important discussion, and today the reality is that the bet of 2005, which is to say, let's make a deal with the March 14 political leadership. I'm not talking about the crowd and so on, but let's or the principle failed essentially. Yeah. And these guys did strike deal after deal with Nabi Hariri, with On, with Hezbollah, with everyone else. They themselves are corrupt and incompetent and so on. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't give them we shouldn't be too generous on them. And they got us where we are essentially. I mean, I would qualify all this by saying, and I wrote it, the leadership of March 14 does not use coercion against its dissenters and rivals, and that's one big difference mm-hmm. with the leadership of Hezbollah and others, which has used coercion and intimidation and so on. So, one argument that we have to be careful. And when people scream "Kullun yani kullun," I scream even louder than them because I do believe in it. But it doesn't mean that we should make false equivalences between the various leaderships.
Right.
They can all be bad, but differently bad. And that's a point I want to drive to the listeners here, because it really, angers me when I hear that, oh yeah, they're all the same. Well, they're all bad, but they're not the same. They have different tools. They have different risk appetite. They have different ambitions. Some of them are purely local or national. Others are regional. So I want to be clear on that point.
Absolutely, and also some can, if history is kind, at some point, some can be either thrown out peacefully, or potentially the party can be reformed to a point that it's a productive partner. That's the best case scenario. And then there's another that you simply cannot. You cannot have that discussion. It'll be met with violence. And that is a fundamental difference. But that said, I agree with the slogan does resonate for the reasons you just described. That it offers blame on everyone, but it's not the same blame on every single individual. That is important. Otherwise, it would be just a senseless slogan without meaning. So I think the meaning remains in exactly what you are challenging on each individual and each party, and Hezbollah does have a unique status. It is the armed militia that remains armed, and it has no curiosity, at least from within at this point, to join the rotten club of Lebanese political parties and then allow for a transition into something better. That doesn't seem on the table whatsoever. I want to ask you if you have any optimism given all that's happening, and I'll include everything here. Prior to the blasts, hyperinflation, economic collapse, political uncertainty. That's the best way, maybe the rosiest way to describe it. The potential for violence, negligence, corruption, state intimidation, free expression is being attacked regularly. The things that I think made us feel like we were part of a bubble maybe in Lebanon, that we could ride out certain storms, maybe. That bubble is burst with many things that happened, including the Beirut blasts. And, I know that the whole city felt the shock, and I know the whole country has been mourning. And but I think to me, it's a permanent scar. I can't see us sort of healing from that moment. I sense, and I want you to correct me if you disagree here. I sense that maybe it's too late for reform. That maybe now it's either going all the way, whatever that takes, just going all the way, or dealing with a failed state. And I know life isn't that simple. I know it's not binary in that sense, but that's the feeling I got from the blasts, that within 2 or 3 days you should see either leaders fleeing the country or being dragged from their homes. And so far, none of that. And that's the blast that should deliver something. And I worry 2 weeks later, the verdict is a blip. No one's been held to account yet for the blasts, and the neighborhoods that both of us know so well in Beirut are still in a very, very difficult situation. We know too many people that are either injured or perhaps scarred for life as well. So I don't want to end it too bleak, but I want you to I want to gauge your mind on that. Is reform still possible, or is it too late, that we actually need something more fundamental to change what we're going through?
Very difficult one, because I basically have to reconcile the analyst in me with the Lebanese in me, with the father in me, with the son in me. I mean, it's really
all the voices in your head and more.
Yeah, exactly. I do have voices in my head. I mean, I play with these arguments all the time. Look, I, I, I I know how it's going to sound, and it's quite horrible, but it, I can see a scenario where Lebanon is a mix of Venezuela and Somalia. And it breaks my heart to say something like that. But, you know, since 2011, 2012, I just felt that the erosion of state capability um, of the state in general, of institutions, the rise of corruption. I mean, just stunning. I mean, I wrote a piece. I'll send it to you. In 2012, like saying, stop using the word resilience. I mean, it's on paper. So
you would enjoy Lina Munzer's recent piece about that. I believe it was New York Times.
I very very much so.
Yeah,
She's very eloquent, and I enjoyed it. Although it also broke my heart, like yours.
Yeah.
But it's I mean, in a way, it's people like her that give me some hope that we can get some things on track. Look, I don't want to be too lyrical. Again, I'm not an activist at heart. Saying it's very simple. If we want to save the country from collapse, and first we need to realize that we don't have the luxury of time. We just wasted over 6 months with the Diab government. No deal with the IMF. Complete disgraceful debates between the banks and MPs and others and the central bank and about the sizes of loss, when we actually have excellent economists who have actually done an excellent forensic, study of what we have and told us we're in dire straits, and they're Lebanese, and they're not, they're looking out for the best interests of the country.
Yeah.
But we're not even there. We don't even. I mean, the IMF is shaking its head and saying you're going towards that wall, and we have zero credit facilities at this point. We don't have enough reserves, and we're still behaving as if we have the luxury of time. How much time will it take to put together a new government? And why isn't the idea that Sami Atallah and others at LCPS and a bunch of others, and I also subscribe to it, of an exceptional government that is charged with negotiating with the IMF and preparing an electoral law for a year plus, so that people have. This is what we should be talking about right now. And then the problem is shared. The politicians are doing a very good job at stalling and playing. I mean, again, they talk as if the blast hadn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's true.
In the past couple of days, we had Hassan Nasrallah and Jabran Basil. I may have missed others, but giving those press conferences, I mean, not press, those speeches. I mean, you feel like you don't get what just happened in the country. I mean, but by the way, they wouldn't dare show their faces in the neighborhoods that were destroyed, just to show you what the answer is.
Yeah.
Look, I would love it, to watch a couple of videos of politicians ran out of the country. I think the problem for a very long time is that we accepted them, we embraced them. I mean, we're all guilty of that. I mean, I certainly am, because I've engaged with that political class. It's a time for ostracizing them. It's a time for making them feel bad. It's the time to shame them. And I can tell you that when I talk to officials abroad, they never have anything positive to say about our political class. They roll their eyes. They, I mean, this is one fundamental problem about Lebanon, is that our sense of self-importance is so big that we actually miss the fact that most countries no longer care about us. And I don't necessarily blame them. don't get me wrong, they care about us, as in, they don't want to see a humanitarian disaster and stuff.
Right.
But we were given chances, we were given funding, we were given attention like almost no other country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have the Beirut blast, and everyone talks about it. I mean, of course, because it was horrifying. But, this is why I tell people, it's like Lebanon is no longer a strategic issue. And that's, I made that point to you back in October, and I want to make it again. It's no longer a strategic issue. At a time where the entire Middle East is collapsing, in Libya, which is all rich, and Yemen, which has 24 million people, and Iraq and Syria next door, that is an absolute nightmare and things like that. Lebanon is not, when you have possible U.S.-Iran conflict, and we are not a strategic issue at the end. However, we have a way of catching the headlines like no one else. That's because people know our food and they like it. Because, I don't know, one half of the dresses on the Oscars evening are by Lebanese, who, including Rafik Hariri and I just forgot his name.
Eli Saab, maybe?
Eli Saab.
Yeah.
Eli Saab, but also the designer who lost everything by the port. Anyway,
his name escapes me too. Yeah.
Because 15% of the traders in London are Lebanese, and because I can go on and on and on.
But can I ask you though? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to go back before the comparison to Somalia and Venezuela. I just wanted to make sure I got this right. That you can imagine Lebanon becoming both a failed economy and a failed state. Did I get that right? The two things are going to be, in a sense, permanently damaged. You will have a state that cannot.
They are in Lebanon. They are interlinked. I think that once we have a failed economy, we will have a failed state.
But then also you said something which resonated with me, that it's time to ostracize, and that's been happening. You do have it, and you said it yourself, which is there's no way. Macron was welcomed to Gemmaisi. There's no shot in hell On would join him in that Kazdura across Gemmaisi or Marib Khair. There's no way he would even show his face. There was
Let me interrupt you on that one.
Mm-hmm.
You do remember when Fouad Al-Sannouha was at the EUB concert, and
they booed him out.
And they booed him out.
Yeah.
And I probably would have joined the booing, but I wouldn't have been worried that Fouad Al-Sannouha would have lashed out at us. At the end of the day, he stood up and left. The problem that we have in Lebanon is that those politicians may actually be ostracized, but the tough guys, are we going to be able to do that to some Hezbollah Abadai or Aoun Abadai or Uwait Abadai in Shari or
even Birri during the recent stuff? Yeah, they're
going to be tough up.
But
so
then
we shouldn't just ostracize them among polite society in Beirut.
But
No, go ahead.
No, but in that toxic mess, that horrible, everything that's wrong right now, is there anything more that can be done to at least not ensure that we're heading towards Somalia and Venezuela? Because you said ostracizing, and yes, that is being done. I think that's being done more now than ever in terms of being able to ridicule certain leaders. And I agree with you, the bullies or the thugs or the armed culprits are not afraid yet. But is that on the horizon in your mind? That you could see the rage eventually reaching the gates of power, and where you could, because I know it's almost sounds silly to say it, but I think, is there any way to break down that wall, given the horrible hand we've been dealt?
Look, the analyst in me will answer you this way. Ultimately, when things get really hard, they're already hard, but when they get much harder, people will again look for a semblance of order, security. They will look for services and food and things like that.
Right.
And there are some people and some organizations in this country that are able to deliver all this, but they will do so in exchange for sectarian loyalty. In terms, they will exchange this in. They'll do this for political obedience and so on. So my concern is that if you let this process of tafkik of the dawla and the iqtisad, I mean, if we get to that point, people will no longer think in terms of, let's improve things. They will think in terms of let's survive that moment at any cost.
Yeah.
And we know this dynamic from war days.
Yeah.
During the 1975-1990 war in Lebanon, a lot of people who knew better accepted the warlords because they needed to get a modicum of security and order.
Yeah.
And if that meant bowing to some guy, who had the big guns, then so be it. Tomorrow, if there are checkpoints around the country by various militias and so on, and if I'm a father in Beirut and I need to get formula for my baby, I will bribe the guy at the checkpoint, and I will be part of this new economy, this quasi-war economy. I don't want us to get there, and I think that there are ways to avoid this. But we are missing every opportunity at this point. I mean, the record of the Diab government is horrendous from that perspective. We made zero progress on the single most important file that this government had to deal with, which was negotiations with the IMF to get back onto financial markets and be able to fund the operations of the country. Since then, we lost our port. Just to put it in a way, we lost our port and 1/4 of our capital. And this is how bad it is. And, I'm not saying it to make you sad or myself, but I just want us to understand the magnitude of the problem. So if there is a new government, and I hope there will be a new government, and I'm certainly not going to get the government I want, but, I'm hoping that it will be better than the one that just resigned. The first 2 months have to be all about this.
Yeah.
Talk to the IMF, figure out what the financial audit is, let's start, and it's going to be very painful. Yeah. The lira is never going to go, the dollar is the lira is never going to go up to 1,500 liras for the dollar. That's gone, okay? A lot of things that we took for granted are gone. But it's better to accept the harsh reality and start fixing things than live in La La Land as a number of politicians want us to do. I mean, some of the debates in parliament, among bankers and so on about, how to distribute the losses and so on, are just delusional.
For many reasons, I appreciate your voice, and I'll use the word sober because you used it at the start. I enjoy your sober analysis. And both the Lebanese in you and the analyst, even if they conflict at times, I like hearing both. And it resonates with me because I'm still looking for some light at the end of the tunnel. And at the same time, it's very difficult to find it. But you keep looking anyway, wherever you can find it, I think, at this point. And the analogies to the war years, I mean, these are why the earlier generations gave up on the country. They had to deal with the situations you're describing, having to negotiate to get your child some milk, negotiating with a militia at a checkpoint. These are things most people don't want to deal with, yet they're faced with that dilemma: either survive or deal with the abnormal. And I don't know. I hope months from now, if we speak again, there'll be some optimism to look at, maybe, even if it's doubtful. And everything you said about an incoming government desperately needing to tackle the things that this current government, for many reasons, didn't. I mean, I think everyone will be watching. And maybe we'll... please.
I'm often wrong. I'm often wrong. I don't say this too loudly. I don't want my wife to use this against me.
No. You're always wrong. With your wife, you're always wrong. That's the rule.
What I'm trying to say is that I really want to be wrong on this one.
Yeah.
I really, really want to be, because like you, I have loved ones, I have dear friends, I have good memories. I have, I really want my daughter to go and spend time in Lebanon, and I want her to be exposed to, our food and our culture and so on. And it hurts. And like you, it hurts. We feel guilty. We're abroad. We're the lucky, privileged ones. We have either this visa or this passport or this job abroad and so on that allows us to do this. But we owe it. We owe it to our citizens, our fellow citizens, to help whenever possible. But we also owe them the truth about how dire the situation is. They know it very often because they live it, but they don't necessarily see it in its entirety. And the way I see it as an analyst is that this is as serious a situation as it gets. I mean, yeah.
Well said. And you know what? Every conversation I had about the banking sector before the collapse were from analysts abroad saying, this is not going to last. And every voice from, not every, but most voices from within were, things will improve. It's fine. We can ride this out. So yeah, and I think, I everything you said resonates. And I'm going to end it with a slightly positive note. Both of us, I think, have a knack for taking parts of Beirut with us. I have the old lighthouse across the apartment. You have the Corniche, and this, my friend, is a lovely photo. And for me, it resonates because this is where I grew up. This is Ras Beirut, it's the Corniche, and I really like that photo. It's one of my favorite backgrounds so far. 200 and some episodes in, I think this is it. So I envy you. You have a great photo. And I don't know. I really appreciate your analysis, and I look forward to speaking again. And really, thank you for staying awake rather late with me just after the verdict was issued. I really appreciate it. So, thank you, Emile.
Perfect. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thanks for listening. And a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.